Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's National Arts Club program, Art, Technology, and the Climate Crisis, a dialogue with Joanie Lemercier. My name is Nathan Byrne. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we're a 501c3 nonprofit in New York with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures, and readings. For more information about the National Arts Club, you can visit us at thenationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. On behalf of our Arts and Tech Committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event featuring one of my favorite all-time artists, the acclaimed French visual artist and environmental activist, Joanie Lemercier, moderated by digital media thought leader and co-author of the Carbon Almanac, Robert Gehorsam, with whom we will explore the interplay of art, technology, and environmental challenges. Following the discussion will be a brief Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And without further ado, let me turn it over to our dear panelists.
Thank you, Nathan. And I'm delighted to be here and to have this conversation with Joanie. A little bit about why I'm here and why I was asked to do this. Most of my career has been spent really actually in the world of computer games, but both for entertainment and other purposes. I do a lot of advisory work with startups in a range of areas in digital media and other areas. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I was asked to co-author an unusual book on climate called the Carbon Almanac, done with author Seth Godin, and as it turns out, about 300 other people. None of us had a background in climate, but we all knew there was a problem looming out there in the world. And I think, as we'll see in our conversation with Joanie, once one encounters the kind of the facts and the looming nature of what we sometimes call the climate crisis or climate emergency, it becomes consuming. But what's interesting is really that the challenges are not science and technology problems, they're problems of the human spirit. And that is where art and science and technology really combine to have the potential to have impact on how we approach the future of the planet and of our lives. And so that in that spirit, I'd love to really turn this over to Joanie. And so a little more background. Joanie is a French visual artist, really currently based, I think, mostly in Belgium, and works very large scale installation pieces that really have always focused on the manipulation of light in space. And as you see at his website, Joanie's work is really inspired by nature and reflects on the representation of the natural world through sort of, you could say, the underlying presence of mathematics, science, and technology. And so there's a lot of environmental implications, and as we'll learn at some point, recently, Joanie, I think in a sense like me, encountered the reality of what climate emergency and human behavior is doing to us. And so I would like to turn it over to you, Joanie. I've been thrilled with our conversations to get us here, and I'd love to have you share with the audience what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Robert, for this nice introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you also to Nathan for inviting me and giving me the stage to share my experience, both in the art and tech, but also these environmental challenges that we're all facing. And yeah, it's I have to say I miss the US a lot. I miss New York City a lot. So I'm going to use this opportunity tonight to go back in time and show you a few projects I was lucky to show in New York City a few years back. Let me share my screen. Can you see it okay? As a visual artist, I really need like a visual element to to tell you my story.
Looks great.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I have to confess I have way too many slides, so I'm gonna skip through. I'm gonna start with this one. It's like one of my earliest projection. This is actually just paper folded into origamis, and I would use a video projector, like a regular projector you would find in home, or just a small projector device. And I discovered back in, I think, around 2005, projection mapping. The idea is very simple. Instead of projecting like a film or an image or a photography, you project some very, very precise elements that will match your projection canvas, your projection surface. So this is just paper folded, and these white lines and the color comes actually from the light that is projected over those simple shapes. I'm obsessed with minimal geometrical aesthetics. I love the work of Sol Lewitt, and all the minimalist movement from the US from the 70s has always been like a great inspiration to me. And when I discovered projection mapping, I was so excited that I really wanted to explore various canvases. So the first one was paper, and quite quickly I started doing projections onto architecture. I realized that the facade in our cities could become a canvas to project animations and to project light, but not, as I was saying, not to project like a video or some footage, but actually to create optical illusions. So this image you see is a projection in South Korea back in 2009. And I recreated a 3D model of the building that allowed me to extrude those shapes and to really play with the audience visual perception, to basically deceive them with light. So it did look like the building was moving and in motion, and actually this city, Songdo, is a smart city. So we were very critical back in the days with my colleagues from Anti-VJ about smart cities and technology. So we wanted to bring the idea of a glitch in the machine, a virus maybe that could affect the architecture. This is why this geometrical composition was made, to symbolize like the fragility of our electronic systems. Some of you might have seen this projection downtown in Miami during Art Basel 15 years ago. I was very, very lucky to be invited all around the world to use those facades as canvases for like. This is obviously inspired by the work of Victor Vasarely. And generally the op art movement from the 70s and late 60s was very, very, very much an inspiration for my early work around geometry. The magic of projection mapping allowed us, this is me and my friends from Anti-VJ, we would really experiment with a lot of different materials, a lot of different structures. This was a wooden sculpture, a very simple structure, and we used regular projectors again to turn this composition into a moving 3D light sculpture, if that makes sense. This was very much experimental. Many of these pieces were in situ and temporary, and were just made as experiments for us to understand our medium. Some of you might have seen some of my work. I was commissioned by Barney's New York in 2013 to do a series of holiday windows on Madison Avenue. And it was a great challenge to fill those small spaces. The holiday windows were actually very, very tiny, and we had to fit in a lot of mirrors and lights, and it was a big challenge for me back in the days to set up a temporary studio in New York and invite a lot of friends from Europe who came over to create these light sculptures. As you can see, I use video projectors, but I try to get away from the flat rectangular screen. I think we have, well, personally, I do have too many screens in my life, too many rectangular screens, monitors, tablets, or phone. So my sort of idea as a visual artist is to get away from this frame and project in mid-air. That's the sort of holy grail I've been chasing for many years. And this is one of my latest projects called Brume. And this is basically a projection of light onto water particles. These are simple black and white compositions that appear to be floating in mid-air. There is a layer of water that you can't really see, but this is what I've been sort of chasing, this myth of the hologram, or, you know, these aesthetics from science fiction movies of these images floating in space. I'm mentioning science fiction movies because later on in the discussion with Robert, we'll be talking about dystopias, and that's going to be a fil rouge, like we say in France. My work really revolves around technology and the use of softwares, the use of technology, projectors, code, algorithms, etc. It's my passion as well in my practice. The sort of back and forth discussions between those algorithms and the artistic ideas are very much the core of my practice. But as you can see on this image, it can be a little bit too much sometimes. I spent 2 weeks in a cave in Manchester in the UK. And you're basically surrounded by technology, and it's a little bit too overwhelming, like VR can be nowadays. So I really wanted to escape technology, and I started doing a lot of hikes in nature. Here, this is in California, in the Mojave Desert, and I've been exploring a lot of deserts and deserted places. The southwest of the US has been utterly inspiring. This is Shiprock in New Mexico. And I think this love for the sublime resonate now in my work, and very much also in my love for romantic paintings from the 19th century, especially the work of Caspar David Friedrich. That has been deeply influential on the way I work on landscape today, and the way I represent nature. Of course, the work of Turner has been also very important for me in the way he represented light and light in space. And also the painter Albert Bierstadt from the Hudson River School was very still now very influential in the way I see landscapes. So yeah, while doing all these hikes and exploration in nature, I got to very remote places like the top of Mount Fuji, and somehow I really wanted to bring those hikes and those experiences back into my work, back into my sort of digital pieces. And here's the result with this piece I called Fuji. This is basically a depiction of this landscape of the Mount Fuji, and you can see in the foreground a forest of bamboos. And okay, I'm going to be a little bit critical of this work right now. You can see the aesthetic is very sort of dry, black and white, and very computery. And now I can tell, now I know that this, for these creations, I was very much influenced, not by the bright colors of Turner, but by the computer aesthetics. And even when I do drawings, I am very much influenced by the wireframe aesthetics that one might find in architectural software, design tools, video games tools, and softwares as well. So I know now that a lot of the aesthetics I've been exploring over the years and the way I represent nature is very influenced by sci-fi movies and also by the sort of computer aesthetics. And you can see also that those landscapes may have some sense of beauty aesthetically, but also it's very dry and very somehow dystopian. And I think, again, the influence of films like 2001 Space Odyssey or Mad Max or Waterworld, or, you know, all these sort of epic movies from between the 70s and the 90s, the sort of the visions of the future I grew up with, I think, molded or shaped the way I see the future and the way I represent nature. Okay, now something completely different. These are not computer-generated landscapes anymore. This is reality. I made those images with a small drone that I use in my work. It's actually almost like a toy drone, but the quality of the image is so good that it looks like a science fiction movie. This location is only 2 hours from my studio. I'm based in Brussels, and this is at the border with Germany. And when I first went to this location, I was very impressed by the aesthetic aspects, because it does look very much like a film. It's almost surreal and really hard to comprehend. And I think that's a common point with the sublime. And this is an iteration of the technological sublime. It's a landscape that's so grand and so big that we can't comprehend it. And for the past 4 years now, I've been going back to this place over and over again to document those machines. Reminds me a little bit of Dune as well, and the sort of spice eating machines. But you know, this place sort of became a bit of an obsession for me, because it's so close to Brussels and I've never heard of it before. And what you see on the screen is actually the CO2 emissions in real time, which is really, really overwhelming. And if you go on Google Maps and you zoom on Belgium, like east of Belgium and southwest of Germany, you see this little gray hole. And when you zoom in, actually, you realize that this is not just a hole, it's actually a coal mine, an open pit coal mine that you can see here in the background. And in the foreground, you can see a village that is being destroyed. Because the problem of this location is not just extractivism and coal. A lot of people are also being expropriated. A lot of the forests are being razed, and the churches are being destroyed. So you can imagine, after discovering this place, I was shocked. I didn't know what to do, and I think this has had a very, very strong effect on me, on the way I see the world. And basically, I became an activist overnight. I was so shocked by all this destruction that I tried to understand who was responsible. So now the end of my presentation is going to be a little bit messy, because I'm a little bit all over the place. You're going to see some art, some activism, some projection, some, you know, it's a little bit chaotic, but I hope you get a glimpse of how I've been feeling after discovering this place. So in my research to understand who was responsible, I found this document from Autodesk, the American software company based in California, and they're actually providing software for the coal mine. And you know, Autodesk are friends. I use their software, and I was so shocked that I wanted to do something. So I got in touch with them, and I made this website, autodesk.earth, when you can understand the connection between the software company and the coal mining industry. Another thing I tried to do was to reduce my consumption, because of course this coal is being used to produce electricity. And as an artist using tech, I consume electricity myself. So I had to do an audit to understand my consumptions. It was very boring. It's mostly going through invoices and bills. And I did some curves to understand, you know, my general consumptions. And over the past few years, I managed to reduce those consumptions by, I cut my emissions by half almost. And I also realized I was probably doing too many projects all the time. I was flying, always going to the next residency, to the next project. So I also realized I should do less projects and more sustainable choices. Which actually I could do a 2-hour conference on this topic, but I won't. I'm going to skip. But yeah, the point was making less projects is actually very beneficial on every level. Of course, reducing my own impact was not going to change the world or close the mine, obviously. So the next step was to get interested or to understand how activism works. And luckily in this location around the coal mine, there are activists who are living in the forest to protect the trees. So I went there, I met a lot of activists, and I also started following some of these actions that they are doing. Here we blocked train tracks to prevent the coal trains to go into the power plants. This is obviously symbolic, and it's mostly to bring awareness and do a little bit of press around this location. Here's a short excerpt of my film Slow Violence. As you can see, this is very different from the geometric projection mapping that I was showing earlier. This is more like a documentary piece, it's the sort of the final chapter of a longer piece called Slow Violence. But in this particular excerpt, I like how technology was a very, very convenient tool for me to document these actions and to produce beautiful imagery, beautiful images. So I made a film called, I said that already 3 times, called Slow Violence, and it's now being shown in most of my solo shows. It's currently in Arequipa in Peru, and it was shown in Madrid in Spain, also in Mexico City, and I think so far it was seen by 500,000 viewers across those different locations and shows. So it's a way for me to sort of bring awareness around this topic. And the next step is a more radical approach. I wanted to use my projection skills, because I can say I'm an expert in laser projection, bright architectural projections. So I often assist groups like Extinction Rebellion. Here it was a protest in London in 2019, and we did this projection on the British Parliament. And this is Buckingham Palace, and I managed to do all these projections, which, you know, it's obviously just symbolic. There was no criminal offense being done, so it's a good way to sort of create images. And I think artists can, especially visual artists like me, my job is to create imagery and to create visuals. So if I can sometime use my skills to create those visuals around those struggles and those protests, that's something I'm very much willing to do. These are sort of selected snippets of protests I attended. And again, like those 2 pictures on the top, these definitely look like sci-fi, but this is actually a big protest that happened a year ago in January in Lutzerat. I think the connection between sci-fi aesthetics and the reality around climate change and extractivism is something that really, really struck me, and this is something I want to investigate more into. I did say it would be a little bit chaotic, so part of these activists' attempts are some artworks as well. I did a series of portraits made with coal. So I took some lignite in the coal mine that I crushed, and then I burned the crushed lignite, and I blended this with vinegar and un liant and oil-based material to create ink made from coal. And I used this ink to make this series of portraits. This is again the CEO of Autodesk, who's providing software to the mining company. And somehow these artworks got got some attention from a journalist from Bloomberg, who made a story about my sort of fight against Autodesk, who claimed to be really green. And so creating images is also a way to attract and to bring attention to this topic. And I even did like a solo show in Germany, in the city of RWE, the company who exploits this big coal mine, which is the largest source of CO2 in Europe. And as an artist, I could be a little bit edgy, and we did call the show Coal Mafia for many, many reasons. Those are not my words. These are the words from people who lived around the coal mine and who got their villages destroyed. Long story. I'm not going to dive into more, but you can find actually more details about my sort of climate actions on this page. And also I have a newsletter where I share my artworks, but also some of this activism. I have a few more slides, but maybe I'm going to keep them for the conversation later with Robert. These are sort of illustrations of more like positive projects unrelated to activism and to more like how do we create a sort of positive version of the future to sort of inspire people and artists. So maybe I'm going to tell more about these solar projections a little later in our conversation. So maybe Robert can join us, and I hope there will be a lot of questions from you and from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel like I have a few questions or comments, but yes, I would love to also see the audience get involved. I have to say, every time I have a chance to sort of encounter your work and hear you talk about it, it just generates more and more thoughts. And I'll try not to press too hard on how do you resolve what you're calling the chaos of your different strands of activity, because that may be something that unfolds over time in it. But I'll just say that as I was watching your slides, I thought we often equate technology with a dystopian future, right? It's technology is going to enslave us, it's going to harm us, it's going to be our master. And nature is the utopian vision, and certainly some of that artwork and some of the imagery you showed would support that. Your Southwest work, I just want to say, my experience in the Southwest is also very reminiscent of time in Tanzania around the Olduvai Gorge, which, you know, as many of you know, is where humanity apparently really originated. It's very inspiring. But now I think we're in a world, and I just would love your thoughts and impression on it, where, as you showed with the coal mine, nature, our transformations of nature are increasingly dystopian, and our technology artwork might be more utopian as a refuge in a way. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on how to resolve some of these tensions of dystopia and utopia in the context of climate and art.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. To be honest, I think I over-romanticized a lot of the dystopian stories from the 70s when I grew up. Even some stories about the robots from Asimov, or, you know, those visions of distant futures. There was something about this aesthetic that I loved very much, because I was assuming that these stories would not happen. They would be just like visions of, like, dark visions of and maybe even somehow random. But now that I look at it again, I realize that a lot of these visions were actually very much sourced by the emergence of technology, even back in the days, and those were not just random dark stories, but a possible future. And now that some of these images are happening, some of these really sort of dystopian moments are happening, now I look back and I say, oh, maybe those artists and writers and filmmakers, they were trying to alert us and to tell us that really there is a great danger if we follow those paths and if we go into these directions. So I think now maybe I misunderstood the intention behind the creation of these dystopian visions. And I feel really bad about, you know, myself over-romanticizing those aesthetics and recreating those sort of dry landscapes and really, you know, I did a lot of beautiful landscapes, generative landscape with code. But there is no life, there is no trace of plants or humanity, or it's beautiful, but it's removed of every anything living, and this sort of terrifies me somehow. So I feel almost now I feel like I have to create more positive visions of the future, maybe more utopian visions, maybe like I really like the solar punk movement, the way the studio Ghibli, Miyazaki started bringing back into his stories and into his aesthetics some low carbon transportation and vehicles. Like he has a lot of flying devices with no oil, gas, petrol. And I find it funny that especially I like the Japanese vision of like I think they have a lot of traumas around nuclear explosions, about how technology can actually erase everything in some cases. So yeah, I think utopias are something that I feel like I have to really investigate in these spaces to possibly offer like an alternative to these dark dystopias. I still like the aesthetics, so I'm still gonna keep exploring those sort of black and white minimal aesthetics, because this is where I come from. But now I'm very, very critical about the promotion of those visions, because it might actually happen. The way AI is now embedded in our lives, sometimes we don't even realize that, some of the portable devices we use are very much connected to huge database, etc. So yeah, now I want to be critical about these dystopias, because that may be where we're heading. And as an artist, I think, we do have to imagine better futures that possibly could inspire people.
Oh, that's great. I actually have a question in a moment, but your point about AI and others leads me to surface one of the questions in the audience has asked, which is, does AI factor into your practice? What role do you think it can play in addressing the crisis of climate change? And I also can answer that second
Right.
piece too.
Looking back, I think I was very much a techno-optimist, because the tech world and the digital world is very much, and I include myself, in a bubble of privilege and of like access to equipment, computers, transportation, and this sort of framework around our lives sort of it gave me the impression that technology would possibly solve everything. I could keep flying because I could buy some carbon offsets. I could, keep my sort of high emission lifestyle, and then I could plant some trees in the holidays. But as soon as you start scratching and exploring a little bit those options, you realize that this is not based on science. The case of Autodesk, I think, is interesting because they claim to be like super green and they are saving. The general idea is that technology is saving the world. We're making the world better. But when you look at the numbers, they are not making the world better. They are working with oil, gas, coal companies. They are at the core of the largest source of CO2 emission in the world. Millions and millions of tons of every single day are running on tech. And the same technology company, they have a PR department whose work is to find some case studies of maybe, we gave a free software to a small architectural firm and they can do a bike that maybe saves a little bit on CO2, but the scale and the scope of those, they don't compare. I think maybe they do good in society, but maybe that's 0.0001% of their impact. But the 99% of their impact is the money they make from shale oil, from tar sands, from coal and gas. So, I'm saying this because I've been in touch with the CEO of Autodesk for 4 years. And now it's clear, like employees from Autodesk are reaching out to me saying that they are so shocked now that they understand that their work is being used by the gas and coal and oil industry. So yeah, I sort of gave hope on technology for being a solution. It would be possible if the main drive from those companies was actually had some social missions and justice missions, but the sole drive is profit. It's like the shares must go high. So if it needs like extracting more minerals in the global south to sell more phones, if it means like enslaving workers in India to do call centers, it doesn't really matter. There's no ethics in tech. That's sad, because I come from the tech, and I was in this sort of romanticized vision that tech was somehow ethical. There is no ethics in tech. Profit is the only drive, and people from Autodesk, they know that their work is expropriating people, and people are losing their homes. They are being deported to different parts of the country. They don't care. So it's a little sad, but I see more hope in recreating communities, rethinking about politics, ethics, etc. And I think low tech for me is the kind of tech that I want to invest into. So of course, technology will have to play a role in the world and in our future. But the big tech companies, they are part of the problem, I think, more than close to any solution.
There's a lot to talk about there.
I know.
I overall, of course, agree with you. The way our systems in the world are set up, the leaders of corporations are almost forced to behave in the ways that they do. And that was some of the realization of my work, working on the Carbon Almanac, which is you're talking about the PR and the what we call greenwashing,
Right.
which is you have to really become a discerning reader or processor of those communications. Some companies do have set themselves on the correct path.
Right.
In terms of, it was a very complicated story. But anticipating the next question a little bit of like, what are the facts? Maybe I'll take a second to level set the essential things to know, and then get to the AI and climate change piece. So there are a set of greenhouse gases, of which carbon is sort of the biggest, the best known, but there are others, methane, nitrogen in some way, which are all emitted by various types of human activity. Like, who would have ever thought, for example, that rice cultivation is a major emitter of methane into the atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
But the net effect of all of these gases from all of these activities is, of course, that temperature rises, which causes sea levels to rise, which causes heat emergencies in various parts of the world. You and I talked a little bit about the concept of the wet bulb event, when temperature and humidity rises to a point that the human body can no longer cool itself. And one might imagine what happens to people that moment. And we're approaching those points all because of carbon, methane, and the systems that don't incent people to reduce them. So sorry to be on my little soapbox for a second, but now we get to the AI. So there really is serious effort going on around the world, both in startups and in larger companies and governments, that's invisible to a lot of people, but is really working. A lot of it is changing agriculture, for example, to actually undertake projects that reduce emissions in various parts of the world. And this gets to the AI piece. So how do you verify, how do you track, and how do you estimate or anticipate how much carbon or methane is going to be avoided, reduced, or actually reabsorbed into the planet as a result of initiatives? And that is where AI, I think, can play, in the short term, a really compelling, powerful role for what's called monitoring. It's very boring sounding, but monitoring, verification, and all that, because otherwise we have to trust PR departments and companies tell
Yeah.
us they've removed it. So while there are problems with the, call it the economic structures that produce the AI, there are uses for AI in a variety of ways that might help us.
Sure.
Before I get to the next question, while you were showing your slides, one thing really, it might seem like a trivial question. How did you come up with the title Slow Violence? And why did you choose that?
It's actually the name that Rob Nixon, I think, is an American researcher, and he wrote a book, I think, called Slow Violence, and so I have no credit in like making this title, but in his studies, he's been researching the impact of extractivism and basically mostly, I think, the extraction of fossil fuel and the impact on nature. And I think what he was focusing on is the things that we don't necessarily see, like the health issues that you will get over several decades living near a coal power plant, or some of the evictions that happened sometime in territories where there is not necessarily the medias, or by example, the pipelines that are going through some territories. So some people sort of will feel the violence of the state, of the violence of the fossil fuel companies. And this is what he describes as the slow violence. It's the type of violence that is not like direct, that we can see on the news, but it's something that is sort of infused in society, the impact of the big fossil fuel lobbies. So yeah, his work, his research has been very, very important for me. But also another book called The Technological Sublime is also a book that I'm still in the process of reading. But now I feel that I have to read more, about political topics, justice in general, and social impacts of capitalism, etc. Because I come mostly from an aesthetic field of, algorithms, computer science, and I was a little bit detached from those social issues and, the bigger picture. I was, as a privileged artist in my sort of tech bubble, I was a little bit detached from the real problems of society. So yeah, I'll have to do a lot of catching up of like reading also philosophy. I like the approach of Spinoza on pantheism and this spiritual idea that maybe everything is everything on earth as a whole can have a sort of spiritual aspect. So not necessarily religious, but I like how Spinoza was sort of brought those new topics and concepts around beauty, around the sublime as well. So yeah, now that I made some images, I have to read and write and learn to be able to unfold more of this work with more sense and a more sort of grounded approach.
Right. Well, we can share reading lists in the future. And your reference to Spinoza and the sort of spiritual thing it's actually really an important piece, I would just say, for also for our listeners here in the audience, is that and it really relates to your artwork, is that underlying our what's happening in human activity relative to climate is the result of a particular worldview about our relationship to nature, which assumes that nature we call it dominion, and it is just there to be used, where other cultures, other societies And even the West in earlier times had call it more reverential, a view that we were part of nature and it was a partnership. And so that is something maybe that is worth exploring in the world of art too. I'm going to actually, I'm mindful of time. I want to, there's some great comments and questions. And so I'm not sure exactly with Zoom the best way to do this, but maybe I'll read the next questions and then we can talk. So it says here, considering from what I've inferred from all the information, climate change seems to be a cataclysmic event. Yes, and it has a quality of slow violence, which is why I asked the question. It's sometimes too slow to activate our brains in the way that, and which I think is why your encounter with the coal mine 2 hours from home was so compelling. And so this person says, I've not seen the actual facts about climate change. They appear to be hard to find. I'll address that in 1 second. For something so dire, these facts may need to be more available for the general public. So this person would like to write a book providing those facts, but I'm not exactly sure how to approach it. Any thoughts? Yes. If you don't mind, Joanie, let me go first and then weigh in. So I'm going to recommend 2 places. One is a great effort called Project Drawdown, and I believe it's drawdown.org, where an enormous amount of work has been done collecting the facts on emissions and what human activities cause which emissions and in what amount, and then how to prioritize human action to reduce on it. So key thing is to get CO2 emissions down to a certain level before we reach what's called an irreversible tipping point, and there's a sort of runaway heating of the planet. And so Drawdown is a great source, and thank you to the Arts Club for posting the link. I had not really planned to self-promote here, but for exactly the reasons the questioner asked, the book that I was privileged to work on called the Carbon Almanac, and I think the URL is thecarbonalmanac.org, does exactly what you're describing, is an attempt to have a kind of non-technical, non-scientific, but very rich exploration of all the factors contributing to, call it the emergency, but also all the actions that individuals can take. Because a big problem is that even if we accept the change is happening, it feels so overwhelming that a sense of hopelessness sets in. And part of our work, and I think part of where you're headed too, is let's restore hope to what we could do. So those would be two sources you can look for the facts. Joanie, any further?
Oh, yeah, it's a difficult one because it's also very different depending on which country you are in. But like in France, we are lucky because for the past 4 or 5 years now, we had medias doing special sections about climate change to basically really explain like the process and the sort of digest like the IPCC report that honestly is really hard to read because it's a lot of scientific data from hundreds of scientists. So reading the IPCC report is hard, but there were a lot of sort of analysis and research. I think the New York Times has been doing really good work over the past 4 years, I think, to bring even to headlines and to the front page some very sort of deep research they've been doing. You mentioned methane. Methane is like even worse than CO2. I think at like similar amounts, I think methane has 20 times more impact than CO2 or something like this. And so researchers from the New York Times, they've been doing analysis of methane plants to see some of the leaks in the factories, that sort of thing. There's a really interesting blog called Heated. I think it's an American reporter who she created her own media. But yeah, it's difficult. I had the most surreal experience 6 months ago. I was invited to be part of a podcast, a space on Twitter, on X. and it was about climate change. And they had a lot of different guests. Some were politicians, some were medias, and the strange thing is that they invited 50% of climate deniers, people who said, oh, no, oil and gas, it has no impact on the climate. We know it's false, but yet Twitter is platforming those views and even giving a lot of space to those non-scientific views. And guess what happened? After 20 minutes in during the podcast, Elon Musk showed up. And then we jumped from 100,000 viewers to 400,000 viewers. And it was just very weird because there was no reason for him to be there. And later I realized that he has a partnership with the person running the podcast. So there's probably some, sponsorship, money under the table kind of situation. So it's very hard to have an objective view on such topics when there is some sort of corruption and there's a lot of economic interest around fossil fuels. We have the problem in France as well. The largest producer of oil is a good pal of Emmanuel Macron. So, it's tricky. So I do understand when people say, oh, it's hard to get reliable information. It can be hard because, those power structures are not easy to navigate through. But yeah, no, I think reading your book is also a good step. I just ordered it and yeah, I'm really glad some people are doing the work, the research, the analysis, and making it available.
Right. It's really, and this relates to the dystopia-utopia framework, is as you sort of start to realize what's happening, right? And it may just be that your weather, which is different than climate, right? That your weather suddenly is shifting, you go, well, something's going on, or suddenly here in the US, you can, in areas even like where I live in California, it's harder to get home insurance, right? Because of the risk of floods, fire, earthquake. And that's climate. That is the result of human activity inducing climate change. So so I would say, the book that I was part of is certainly a very accessible, useful thing. Drawdown is I guess you could say in some ways a canonical source of the comprehensive data that's very accessible to read as well. So that let me move along. There's some of these are comments in the Q&A. I'll read them to honor the participants, and some are questions, and we'll just figure out what we want to address. So the next person, there's many people here named anonymous attendee, says, my spirit says that compassion is the force that leads to selflessness. Technology is just a tool for a means, as Einstein said. The ancients knew something that we seem to have forgotten, that all means are but a blunt instrument if they do not have a living spirit behind them.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. We agree. In the world of sort of climate and call it capitalism or climate and finance, and social impact, one of the big themes is that the full costs of any decision are typically not accounted for when a decision to farm, create a ranch in Brazil, is done, or mine iron in Australia, because the impact of that work is called an externality, happens outside of the business activity. That the health impact on the local communities, the carbon emissions, all these things. And so I say that because it could be argued or suggested that cultivating a spirit of, call it compassion, in leaders will help them internalize those externalities and make different decisions. That may sound a little fuzzy and soft, but it is part of what's necessary. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I'd like to move to the next question, I believe, from Charlotte Kent. And she says here, so much conversation around ecological issues speaks to the future, and a certain amount of art engages with a similar speculation. But focusing on the future shifts away from the present tense context that can also attune us to the necessity for changes now. How can art, that obviously operates in an expanded time since it carries ideas in the future, be present tense in these ecological issues without depending on a kind of journalistic documentation, and being present tense, balance crisis, dystopia, and romanticism, utopia? Over to you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and I love the fact that I think already in those questions we have possibly a lot of practical solutions. The words that are being used, you mentioned earlier that we should probably change or question the view, how we view nature as a something external, where we could just extract and use and dispose. And there's possibly an ontological shift that probably has to happen, and no one has the solution, but I guess as artists or writers, or we could probably investigate in those spaces. There's one slide I'd like to show. I don't know if it's possible to bring that image back on stage. It's basically in my own practice. Instead of just using a regular video projector that needs electricity, so I need either like nuclear power or coal to make electricity, or gas to make electricity, I'm now trying to find alternatives to do projections of light. And one alternative I've been exploring lately is to use the sunlight, because guess what? It's much brighter than any video projector available on the market. The brightest projector ever you can buy, it's around 60,000 lumens, to give you an idea. The sun in the summer, it emits 100,000 lumens. So we have a potential here to just use the sunlight that is available and sort of easy to manipulate with lenses and with optics. With mirrors, we have a lot of tools that are available to focus the light and to concentrate this light. And so I'm not sure if you can see my screen right now, but I've been doing some experiments around sunlight. And what you see here is a little mirror that I use to create this super, super bright square. Again, the minimalism maybe of Sol Lewitt or Carl André is sort of, or Donald Judd is sort of popping in my work again. So now I'm building some small devices using electronics. I'm not going like full low tech. I still use, Arduino, some low power consumption electronics, and I'm making those little robots that I use to move rays of sun around. So this was the first sort of installation I made. It's called Solar Storm, and I'm trying to make an impressive project. It doesn't have to be less impressive than the big projector thing. And I'm trying to to keep making those highly visually impactful projects by using less electricity and less energy. And this image, maybe if you can see it, it's a tree in Brittany, and I use a very low power laser to light up the beauty of this tree. So here, as opposed to the projects I was showing you earlier, it's not about a fancy super high-tech projection on a facade to make a trompe-l'œil. It's just the idea is just to highlight the intrinsic beauty of the structure of the tree using a laser. I think this laser was 8-watt laser. It consumes about 50 watts if you take like the electronics and stuff. That's 100 times less than those big heavy projectors that I used to use. So I think there's a way for us to keep using technology, equipment, lasers, but in a more sort of in a bit of a search for sobriety when it comes to consumption and resources. So yeah, that's my that's how what I want to be exploring. Oops, let me show you something in motion. So this is very simple. It's my latest sort of laser project. But the beauty of it is it's not about technology. It's just about the intrinsic beauty of this tree. So I'm now working with cities in France, and I'm going to try to bring this installation maybe to replace the sort of dead Christmas tree we put on the square, on the town hall, maybe to replace it with this kind of thing. I'm not sure it's the great solution, but you know, this is the kind of thing I want to be exploring in the coming years.
Well, that's great, because the next question actually from Lawrence is really to ask, are we able to reach the scale of consumption that sustains the world if we switch to these two alternative methods? I suppose the answer is it depends. But as we can see here, and even in your work, it's definitely possible. And I will say that the level of innovation that I can see going on in all sorts of domains, partly is the result of the way that certainly the US government, but even the EU, have incentivized innovation and investment in solutions, is that the potential to do so is there. But again, getting back to our dystopia utopia paradigm, because that's what everybody asks, you know, are you optimistic we're going to solve the problem of climate change? And you know, as we had talked about before this, the answer is probably yes, but not equally for everybody. And that's where I think, you know, so the social justice side of climate action becomes important, is to remind people that those who are out of sight of decision makers are almost certainly, you know, in the line of great harm, even as we solve food production, power, and all of these other things.
Right.
So I assume you plan to continue your climate action direct work.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think also I questioned the way I travel. I used to be, you know, in the plane twice a week to go to the next project, to the next thing. And, you know, after being so shocked about this coal mine and about our actual impact, because I had in front of my my very own eyes the sort of the end of the world, or the destruction of the world, because it does look like Mad Max. So it struck me, it moved me so much that I decided to stop flying. And as an international artist, it's a little challenging, as you can imagine. But 4 years later, I can see a lot of actually positive impact. Now, when I develop a project, instead of going on site and installing myself and then moving somewhere else and coming back to you know, for the maintenance or something, now I design my projects and my installation to be they have to be deployed by someone else, by a technician in Asia, by a festival in the US, or, you know, by various people. So I design projects to be easily deployable. And the result is that I do 10 times more projects than I used to do, because right now I have a project running in the US, in Wonder Spaces, a project that actually brings money every month because they sort of pay a rent for this piece. And I have several projects around the world. I have one solo exhibition in Arequipa in Peru. I didn't go because I sent instructions, very much inspired by the instructions of Sol Lewitt. Again, like his legacy still lives, even in digital arts. So I make a lot more projects than I used to do. But yeah, like another example is I miss New York City, I miss the US. I used to come, spend at least like 2 or 3 weeks in New York City every year. I haven't been for 5 years and I really miss it. But now I'm planning in 2025, I'm planning to come by boat, and to actually, I'll try to do a lot of shows, hopefully a gallery show in New York, maybe a couple of solo shows, and a big residency in the Southwest. So it is not as easy as before. I used to go to, to go and see the rich collectors in Miami and make some deals with my gallerist in New York. And so all this is sort of gone for now, but now I need to plan things ahead. Like I'm still doing international travel, but very little. And I do optimize a lot, any travel, to be honest. So yeah, it's a lot of change, but it's actually very beneficial when I look at it.
Right. I was going to say to the question about consumption is not only can we have solutions to preserve current consumption, but we can rethink, do we have to do everything we're doing? Do we have to buy everything we're buying and all that? And we're still, as it seems that you are, very satisfied with how life unfolds by changing consumption. We have time for one last question, and there is one more in the queue here. Gerald asks, have we heard about, you or I heard about Rethink, followed by Tony X/Tony Saba view on technology solutions for climate change. I have not, so Joanie, over to you.
What's the exact question again about technology?
Have we heard of Rethink?
I haven't. No.
No. So we'll have to investigate that.
Right. Yeah.
I think we are out of time. Thank you to to Nathan, the National Arts Club, for the event. There are links I think people can see to follow up for upcoming programs, and also to become more involved directly with the Arts Club itself. With that, any final words for everybody?
Sure. Well, I'd like to thank you for having me. Also to thank all the guests for being there, listening to us. I know that some of my approaches can be seen as a little bit radical. When I sort of point fingers at like a specific company, or but I'm trying things. I'm not sure I'm doing it the right way. That's why I'm exploring activism, but also artworks about climate change. Also, I want to create positive imaginaries, and I don't want to keep telling those dystopian stories that really inspired me, but I really want to create something, maybe another path, using low tech, less consumption, etc. It's going to be a long journey, and I'm really glad to hear about art lovers, collectors, patrons, people who actually are very, very curious about the topic and very interested. And I think the solutions will come from those discussions, like the one we just had. Thank you so much, Robert, for your inputs and this discussion. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I miss the US so much. I miss New York and the Southwest, and I hope to see you here in 2025 when I sail to come and see you. I'm sure it's going to be even better then.
That will be great. Thank you so much, and thank you to the Arts Club and to everybody for spending the time today.